there.
Hey, June,
Yo,
guess what?
I think we're live.
We're live. Yes,
Ah.
that's our new intro is to surprise you when we go live. So we did. Welcome, everybody. Boy, it's Saturday night, unless you're in the Pacific time zone, in which case it's still morning or something like that, noon, something. But welcome. I want to welcome special guests whose name I'm going to totally butcher. Jeff Schaap. Did I get it?
Great. Yeah, you got it perfect.
We have, of course, June from Nybbles and Bytes, and our friend Jeff Brace from VCF. So welcome, everybody. So I'll just start. You have a video about some computer from some point in time that's long gone.
Yeah, you might know something about it.
I may know too much.
Yeah,
you know.
I think you probably know more about it than I do. Yeah. So for the past really about 3 years, I've been ramping up to produce this film called I Adore My 64.
Right.
And, I think the main thing to understand about it is it's not a history film. I think there's a lot of things out there about the Commodore 64 and its history and the history of the company, and they're great. I'm not at all downplaying the things that do exist. I think they're great.
Right.
They've been great education to me. But this film is really intended more to focus on the Commodore 64 community as it exists today, and the people and the groups and events that are keeping the platform alive. So in that way, I like to think it's sort of a unique approach.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's what I had to find out about places like VCF, because the first time I went to one, and it wasn't even called VCF yet, I'm like, does everybody know this is old crap? Then I realized, well, not to everybody, and then I realized everybody's friends, right?
Yeah.
That it's a community. So I'm sorry, June, I just may have referred to stuff that's in the background there mentally when I said old crap.
Old crap. Yeah, that is a lot of old crap back there, for sure. And unfortunately, it's multiplied a little bit.
It has, hasn't it?
Yeah, so I've got an H8 all set up right there, right next to the H11A.
June's the only person I know that I get an email from that says, I have strained my back lifting the AS400 off the dresser to put in the closet.
Well, look, everybody has an AS400 on their dresser, of course.
Yeah, right.
Two or three.
So back to and Jeff, we're going to keep doing this. We're going to just keep branching off just like willy-nilly and yes, right. And mostly because hardware engineers are involved. So what I totally get the angle you're going for. This is like the community of today, and I saw like Bo Zimmerman in there. Who else in there?
Well, so like one of the things that we decided right off to sort of help people see what the film would be like and have more confidence in it, because we've all supported those Kickstarter projects or other crowdfunded efforts that didn't go anywhere. Was we're going to produce a few segments before we even try to launch campaigns. So the people that we were really privileged to get to talk to were, you mentioned Bo Zimmerman, and then shockingly David Murray agreed to be interviewed, and then Anthony Becker, who's probably more well known from the Guru meditation. He and Bill Winters have done a bunch of videos, but if you talk to Anthony, he really got started on the 64, and he has a big collection of Amiga and Commodore 64 stuff. Some of it really kind of rare and kitschy. Like, well, one thing he has is a Commodore 65. Bo also had a Commodore 65. So I think probably just the privilege of seeing both of those things in person was worth it. But yeah, Anthony has a huge collection. He has some odd things during that period of time when the Commodore name got licensed out to a bunch of weird products like MP3 players and all kinds of
irons
stuff.
and
thermostats,
right,
computers,
and all kinds of stuff. And he also had some pretty old Commodore stuff. Like he has a Commodore typewriter, Commodore 2000 typewriter, some adding machines and things like that. So he has a really cool collection. So we just sat down with him and talked about his story. And then a guy named Leif Bloomquist, who's had a big hand. Okay, great. Yeah. He's an awesome guy. He was kind enough to sit down with us and give us a good interview about his personal experience with the 64, but then also sort of his connection to TPUG and World of Commodore, Toronto Pet Users Group, for those that might not be familiar, which I think, from what I understand, is one of the oldest Commodore user groups in the world, now, arguably.
Let me ask real quick, do you know who designed the Commodore 64?
Well, I have a smattering of knowledge, but that's a great question, because out of all the things I've seen and read, I am not clear on who the main designers were. And, people talk about the Max sort of being the first Commodore 64, but I don't know exactly how much of the 64 was derived from the Max. So maybe you could educate me on that.
I can. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to introduce you to the guy that designed the Commodore 64, Albert Charpentier. Hi, Albert. How are you doing?
Hello.
How are you?
I'm good.
We just had to do this, so I apologize. But no, there's a real issue here in that I didn't know who... I knew about Albert as the chip designer, but I didn't know about Albert as the C64 designer. So even internally, that we lost the message as it kind of, went through time.
Yeah.
So and people back then, you had to beat their stories out of them because they're so busy. They don't sit around and talk about, back when I was young a year ago. So what questions, Jeff, since you've been blindsided by Albert here?
You know what, Bill? I heard you like to do this to people.
Bill just dragged me into this thing, and Bill and I've been working now, I guess about a year now, right? Bill and other projects.
A year and a half now,
Yeah, I continue to design stuff. I love to design, so it's fun stuff. But yeah, Commodore. Anyway, it's hard to believe it was over 40 years ago that I left Commodore. But it was a project when I worked on it. I mean, so
when was the 64? When was that moment when it was like, ding? It's from here. It's going to become a 64.
I am a video game guy. Okay, I mean the original VIC-20, the video chip that I designed for that was for video games. Okay, and I love video games and. Actually, the original, I designed a ROM for Atari when they wanted to do the Asteroids game.
Right.
And it wouldn't fit enough. They didn't have enough room for the code. So I designed a bank switching ROM for them that allowed them to get double the amount of ROM in the space. And as long as they clicked one particular address, it would flip over. So it allowed them extra space to be able to do the Asteroids game. But I love doing that kind of video games was what I was into. And so the VIC-20 was the first attempt at that kind of a project. And Bob Yanis, who was really the other designer, there's about 4 or 5 people that are involved. Myself, Bob Yanis, Bill Russell, and a couple of other guys that were involved, that were really the main drivers of that whole project, okay? Both the VIC-20. So Bob Yanis, I actually was interviewing people to bring into Commodore, and he was a student, and he saw the VIC-20 prototype that the chip, the VIC-1, the prototype that I had designed, and he said, "Gee, can I do a student my senior?"
we call that Commodore attitude.
Right. So sure, I said, "Take it home." So he did that, and he put a little operating system in it, and then we came back and we hired him, and then literally about 3 or 4 months later, we showed this to Drac Tramiel, and he loved it. Okay, he said, "That's what I want." All right.
Right.
So then that became eventually that got put into Chuck Peddle's group out in Palo Alto, and then they turned that into the VIC-20 after a lot of grief. Chuck was he was not into the home computer thing. Okay?
Right.
So
he wasn't.
He really was not about that. But at any rate, Dak insisted that it be done, and the VIC-20 became a very, very positive project,
and Seiler did a good job on that.
Yes,
who it was given to. Yeah.
The team out Palo Alto did a nice job. And so this is my wine for the day, by the way. It's a Saturday night. I'm here.
Yeah, I'm a recovering Commodore engineer, so I'm doing the diet soda.
So anyway, after the VIC-20 chip was out, we then decided that I wanted to do the next generation of video game. And this is even before the VIC-20 had happened. I started on the chipset that was going to be the Commodore 64. But it wasn't a Commodore 64. It was just, okay, we knew that the video chip I designed that became the VIC-20 had limitations. So what can we do to fix that? And the sprites in it, and then Bob Yanis, he really loved audio, so he designed the chip. And the two of us architected that entire system. Okay. Actually, the VIC-20 architecture was done by me because of the fact you really needed to have DMA.
Right.
And believe it or not, the VIC-20 was the first true DMA solution where you had direct memory access, where you're ping-ponging back and forth without any interaction, and the system automatically. You had the cost of that was the memory had to run twice as fast.
Right. Fee high.
All memories run real fast now, but back then I had to have a memory that ran twice as fast so it could ping-pong back and forth. And that was really the first very true DMA solution for that. So we then moved that forward on the Commodore 64, but then we added sprites, we added the audio. So the architecture was really about that whole thing, and we were putting together the next generation. Then the VIC-20 became a huge success. And then all of a sudden it was like, okay, this is now going to be a computer. It's not a video game anymore. Although it had a lot, obviously we know it had joysticks and all those things. That's why it has all that, because that's what I wanted to do. So anyway, that was that. It was probably, I guess it was around March, when sometime about the first quarter of 1981. And we had been working on the SID and the VIC-2 chip, and it was like, okay, now we really got to step it up and try to get these things done and produce the thing and show a prototype at the January 82 CES. So that was what caused that. That was the genesis of all that. But I've been working on wanting to do video games since I was literally, honest to God, since I was 8 years old.
Right.
I always wanted to know how a TV set worked. And that's why I became an electrical engineer, and then I designed chips to control a TV set.
Right.
Wow.
Now,
awesome.
Didn't you tell me one time that the 64K that was a Jack marketing?
Correct. Yeah, the original architecture was a 16K RAM architecture, because 16K dynamic RAMs were the prime. That was the main capability at the time, and 64Ks were just becoming available, but they were very expensive. So in one of the meetings we had with Jack, he basically said, I want you to redesign this so that it has can use the 64K DRAM. Okay, at which point that's when we put in the bank switching. That's when we redid the 6502 and added the register for the bank switching. They made it into a 6510. So I banged that out in a few weeks, honestly.
Great.
But it was a little messy because the O2 could really only handle that, and we had to have space for the video to have its space.
I/O and stuff.
It was a little messy in terms of the memory architecture was messy, but it was the best we could do in the short notice we had, because literally it was like, okay, we're designing the chip. Here we are in June. And we got to get this done in December, and then had this other whole memory management system. And,
right.
So that was, but it was the right move, and I loved it because of the fact that we get more memory to play with. That means we can do good video games.
Right. And you can still put 64 on the box, right?
Right.
Whether it was all there or not, it's
Right.
yeah.
Yeah, that was a key piece to the whole thing. That and I thought it was great because it was pushing the envelope of what technology could do, and that's what I love to do as well.
So I want to introduce you to everybody here, and then ask Jeff to talk about his project a little bit. Above you on the screen is June from Nybbles and Bytes, and also a Google engineer. We've been talking about her.
Yes, Bill has mentioned me. Had mentioned you.
It's an exclusive, or it's
yeah.
We have Jeff Brace from VCF, who I think you know. Oh, Albert. Can I get you to come to VCF East to be interviewed by Dave McMurtry about timelines and where you guys moved to, and Yanis and the timeline?
When is that?
That'd be in the spring.
Probably. I mean, if that's far enough out, I should be able to lock that out.
Yeah,
right.
5th, 6th, and 7th.
So you will have heard it by then a couple dozen times. So that's how I worm my way into your thinking.
Bill's very good at getting speakers.
Oh yes, I know. He has roped me into a few things here and there.
Yes.
The strategy.
We're working on some projects together, which are very interesting. So it's turned into a nice.
Yeah, we're having fun. It's
good.
It's funny. We're like the two guys that know how to design a Commodore 64. If you think about it. So, hey Jeff, tell Albert about your video project and the view you're taking. What's the unique selling proposition of this thing?
Yeah, so I was saying a little bit earlier that the film that we've been winding up to produce for about 3 years is really more of a focus on the community as it exists today. Collectors, preservationists, hardware designers, software designers. There's been a good number of films, I think, on the Commodore 64's history and the history of Commodore 64 as a company, but not a lot of focus on what's happening today. And that kind of intersects a little bit with my own story of, having gotten a Commodore 64 in 1983, when I was like 10, 11 years old, and just having a huge impact on my life, and then continuing inadvertently, not by my own design, to be involved with other Commodore machines as time went on. Like when I was in high school, I had exposure to Amiga 2000 and the video toaster system, and then used that in college and at my first job. And I was like, Commodore was always there, even though I didn't. That wasn't the path I designed. And then got away from it. I think early to late 90s, but probably about 2017, 2018, I saw a video on the internet. I was like up late at night taking care of my newborn daughter and poking around on YouTube, and a guy I'm betting most of you know, Dan Wood, on the Retro Hour, I saw a video that he created about how the Commodore 64 could get on the internet in this day and age. And I was like, what?
Yeah.
No way. And that sort of kicked everything off for me. And I was just shocked and surprised. I mean, I guess I always figured in the back of my mind, well, there's probably still people that are interested in the Commodore 64 and, still do stuff with it. But I had no idea the global community that exists and how many people are passionate about keeping it alive. And it was just shocking to me. And then, I got more involved myself and started, I thought I'll just get one, to try it out.
That's how it starts.
Yeah, exactly. Now I got to have a room full of different Commodore stuff, Commodore 64s and other machines I didn't have when I was growing up, PET and Amigas and stuff like that. And so, I'm not an engineer by any stretch of the imagination. Would never, not that smart. Not a programmer either. Could never, work in machine language, I don't think, or most any other programming language. But I started to think about how can I contribute to this community? I'm not either of those things, but I am a filmmaker and have been a career filmmaker for about 25 years. So, I'm like, maybe this is the way. So, I have been sort of building up to this campaign for about 3 years, and we did sort of a preview video of what the film will look and feel like, with a couple of well-known Commodore community people, David Murray, Bo Zimmerman, Anthony Becker, and Leif Bloomquist of T-Pug. So, that's sort of the direction we're headed, and that's sort of what I guess kind of sets it a little bit apart from maybe other things that are out there. That are great things,
right?
Not dissing on them at all, but this is just a little bit different.
You should get an intro from the guy that designed the Vic chip.
Yeah, that wouldn't hurt. Maybe somebody will twist his arm for me.
Oh yeah.
Right. June, do you have an early memory of the Commodore 64?
Oh gosh. Actually, it was of the VIC-20, believe it or not.
Oh, okay.
So my first Commodore computer was the VIC-20 in 1989 when I was 8.
Wow.
And
we picked it up out of
his first computer was a VIC-20, by the way, Elon Musk.
Oh yeah, I have heard that, right?
Yeah.
It wasn't long before we got a 64, though.
I got a word to pick with you, Albert, about the Elon Musk thing. Then.
Oh, okay. That's the rumor has it. I don't know.
Yeah, karma's a bitch, man.
Oh well, it's funny.
Yeah. So, you were saying VIC-20, and when I think VIC-20, I think of the people that went on to become hams. It's like that age group, and the VIC-20 was a good computer for hams because it was quieter. It wasn't kind of the full spectral event that the Commodore 64 is. So, Albert, I was quoted as saying the VIC chip is a wonderful chip, but it's a lot like owning a cat. You're not sure who owns who. Because the Vic demands the bus. It's all about.
It wins. Yes.
Yes. Here you go. Here's the bus.
Video can't wait. It must.
Video can't wait.
Right.
And then at Ensoniq. So I looked at one of your schematics from Ensoniq, and of course it's drawn by Sue from Commodore. So. And she does that trick where she runs behind blocks and stuff, so it's Sue. Yeah. I looked at it and I go, this is a VIC chip for sound.
Yes. Exactly. There's that. I took the same architecture I did for video and we then transplanted it into Ensoniq when I started that to be able to have multiple channel audio systems.
Right.
Yeah. So you that was one of the things with Ensoniq that we did was that the Moogs and the various synthesizers that were out there were single channel, and if you needed an additional channel, you had to reproduce everything. So what we did was we took the SID architecture and then married that to the VIC architecture, and created a multi-channel or multi-voice, I should say, a multi-voice synthesizer. And that became that really was the backbone of the Ensoniq technology.
Right. And what was the name of that chip? Because you guys were chip namers back then.
I know. I'm trying to remember.
What are you saying?
It was DOT. Digital oscillator chip. DOT 1, DOT 1, DOT 2. And then we got rid of the DOT name. And then literally the third generation we called Otis. Now, Otis was because of the fact that one of the guys in the group liked Otis Redding. And it was Otis Redding sitting on the dock of the bay.
Okay. Now, when I said you guys were big on naming chips, I didn't mean you were good at it.
I won't argue that.
The Atari guys had some issues too, I think.
Yeah, it was sort of like ad hoc, very quick.
Right. So, are you surprised that the Commodore 64 is still around, Albert?
Me?
Yeah.
I am amazed. I mean,
same here.
I mean, I really liked working on it. It was really something that I was proud of. Where the Vic 1 with the Vic 20, was something I knew was a good step. But the whole VIC-2, the SID, that whole computer was something I was really proud of. I thought that was a really significant technological step. So I really was. But I mean, how do you believe a computer or something's going to be around and people are talking about it 40 years later?
Right. We were just trying to get the darn things working.
Right.
In some cases.
Yeah. So it was interesting from that perspective. I mean, you don't think about that when you do it. I really wish I would have, like when we built the first 5 or 6 of them that we took out to the CES in 1982. I wish I would have saved one of those. It would be worth it.
It'd be worth some money. Yeah.
It would be really a nice memento.
Right. What was the VIC 1001?
Oh my goodness, you're really stretching my memory now.
Well, it was 40 years ago, but that was between the VIC 20 and the C64, right?
Yeah, but it was something that they were going to put more memory into it. That was the thing, because the VIC-20 only had like 4 or 8K, I believe, and they were going to do a 16K version of that. Yeah, but it was it's like it was a way of extending that line, but then the Commodore 64 was on the line, so that it never saw the light of day. But in case it was sort of like it was a backup that we weren't working on it at the Commodore Valley Forge. We weren't working on it there.
It was in Japan, right?
Yeah, correct. If we missed our deadlines, that might have been the backup.
Right. I'm familiar with that thought process too. You know, whenever we worked, we could tell there was a net there named Mitsumi or somebody just waiting to take our jobs. You know?
Yeah. Right. Well, that was Jack creating the competition between
that's what I'm getting at. Yeah.
Forge, right. Yeah. I mean, there's always that competition.
Hey, didn't the Commodore 64 start with a faster disk drive, or was supposed to have a faster disk drive?
You're bringing up all my bad memories.
Does it hurt when I do that? I'm not touching you. I'm not touching you.
When we designed it, it was going to have a higher speed memory interface.
Okay.
And, because I knew that you needed that to download games faster and get updates and so forth.
Right.
And unfortunately, the VIC-20 had the slower hard drive. And there was a whole warehouse full of those puppies.
Yeah.
And they said, nah, let's just leave it let's leave it the VIC-20 disk drive interface. So I was forced to put the slow interface on it.
Wow.
And that really bugged the shit out of me.
I heard marketing had some input on the slow interface.
Yeah. Well, again, back then you got to remember the marketing folks and I mean the only people who knew what was going on and where things were going are my contemporaries. I mean, I knew Steve Jobs, I knew Bill Gates. I mean, I met them at Commodore, and there was a lot of visionaries in the industry at the time, but we were all engineers and we were trying to drive it. But then, I mean, I remember the marketing and people, Jack Tramiel, when the +4 came out. And Jack literally, this is one of the reasons I left Commodore, is Jack said, well, a computer's just a big calculator. You got a word processor, you've got a spreadsheet, you got, well, back then it was like PowerPoint. Right. It wasn't PowerPoint back then. And it was like 4 things. And he said, well, you put 4 apps in it, what more do you need?
Right.
And that sort of was the mentality of a lot of folks that recognized that that's what happens. I mean, even out in Silicon Valley, when I left Commodore and I tried to get funding, I was actually going to do the Commodore 80, which Jack wouldn't let me do, which is why I left. And I tried to get funding in Silicon Valley, and even the folks out there went, well, and literally, this is what I was told. IBM's got the high end, Compact's got the medium, middle end, and Commodore's got the low end, and there's not room for anybody else.
Right.
Can you imagine?
Wow.
So, and when you mentioned the +4 and those 4 attributes, right? Those 4 features, to me, the 5th attribute in Jack's mind would have been, and it's cheap.
Oh, well, that's always the case.
Right. It's its own quality that whatever it is, it's also cheaper than anything the competition has. Is why we need a new. That's why we needed TED. It was cheap.
Yeah. I mean, and that's certainly what made the Commodore 64 have the longevity. I mean, it became affordable. It was the first affordable computer, and I mean, I told Bill about the arguments that Jack and I would have about components and quality, and I remember the biggest one of the big ones was he was willing to put the 64K RAM in there, but then I wanted to put a higher quality RF modulator in there.
Okay.
Jack basically was fighting me on that, and then one day I took him out into the lab and I said, well, "Here's the one you want. Here's the one I want," and basically, he went, "Oh, okay." And then he went, "Oh, okay, yeah, I guess it is worth an extra $1 or $2."
Oh wow, that much? That's
grief, that's a lot.
We had arguments over dimes. There was one argument we had where it was an extra dime for something.
Wow.
And he goes, "Well, we're going to build 1 million of these things. It's 1 million dimes. If you don't want
That's
it,
right.
I'll take it."
Right.
Right.
Yeah, we still have those arguments even today. And like whenever I was working on AOI or Coral, like every small thing that we could cut the corners on, we would.
Yeah.
So like adding a heatsink, no, let's try and find another way to reduce the power consumption.
Exactly.
Wow.
Right.
Well, it's brutal sometimes. It really is. I mean, but
So
I get it.
Go ahead, June.
So someone's actually asking an interesting question. So maybe Bill or Albert, you two can answer this one, but maybe you could explain how you were so well equipped to design a computer at such a young age.
Wow.
We were equally
That's kind of a loaded one.
equally unequipped as to the people coming out of college because they didn't teach what we did. Would you agree, Albert?
Yeah, I mean, I was a chip designer, and I designed RAMs and I designed ROMs. But if you think about it, to design memory products, you got to know how a whole computer system works and where memory fits into that, and I/O. So
And the flow, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, and then I was there when Chuck Peddle and his team designed the 6502, and I actually ran simulations for some of that for one of the guys. So I was intimately familiar with what was happening there. And so, again, it was the drive to, I mean, literally, what really was the drive to control a TV set. And that was what was driving me. So,
Right.
I had think about it. At Commodore at the time, we had a microprocessor, we had RAMs and ROMs, and now that was all you needed. All you needed now was a video chip. So,
Right.
And Atari was out there doing their thing, and I didn't like what they were doing. And there was a product called the video typewriter. I don't know if anybody remembers this.
Yep.
Really going back.
Heard about that one. Yeah.
Yes. And
Cover of
I studied that, and I went, well, this is interesting because it had blocks that you could then, it indirectly addressed the alphanumeric character. I went, well, that's kind of neat, but it's very limiting. So the big aha moment was to say, okay, if I can make those blocks RAM rather than ROM, now I can make those blocks whatever I want. And now I can create scenes and I can create all kinds of things. So it was really the video typewriter turning the ROM character set into RAM that allowed us to, that was one of the aha moments that we did, and then obviously SUPRISE is the next step.
Right.
It was this evolution of saying, okay, I knew how to do memory. I did calculator chips initially at Commodore, then I did RAMs and ROMs, and then Chuck Peddle's team came in and I learned about microprocessors. So I sort of had all the pieces, and then the video typewriter was the next piece of my education.
Right. And
so I have a question.
Well, I was going to say real quick, the part I was referring to that you don't get taught is how to be a project manager in a Jack Trammell-led organization. That you either know how to do open field running or you're done.
Yeah, that's true. So, yeah, Jim, you had another question there.
Yeah, go ahead, Jim.
Yeah, actually, Albert, you mentioned that you ran simulations for Chuck Peddle. When you say simulation, what do you mean?
But basically, there's a real big time crunch in the 6502. So you're bringing in the opcode that now has to go through a decode section, which then has to go through. Essentially, when you look at a microprocessor, you've got an ALU, you've got XY registers, so that's laid out, and so now you have to try to get the information coming in the opcode, decode that, run that in through a whole section of controls that open and close the switches onto the various. There were 3 buses internally, and so you had a time crunch on it. And so you had to simulate how quickly could you get that information through the decoder and through the switch control system to get the data onto the bus. Okay, so again, I didn't.
SPICE, right?
I was a memory designer at the time. Okay, and one of the guys there asked me to run a simulation. The other guy, I'm trying to remember, Bill, the guy who's out in Arizona, I forget his name.
Oh, Mensch.
Bill Mensch, yes, Bill Mensch. Bill Mensch was the key architect. Him and another guy, Will Mathis, was the key architect of that. And Bill was responsible for most of that. Will asked me to double. All I did was take the information and just run it again, just to verify what was going on there. But it taught me all of the pieces about how a microprocessor worked.
Right.
So were you using SPICE or some other tool?
Yes, SPICE.
Okay.
I mean, literally, we had an IBM 360 in the basement, not in the lower floor.
Yes.
And you would kick off a simulation, and 24 hours later, you would get your results.
if you were lucky and there was no power outages or anything.
Yes, I mean, it would take that long to get a simulation to run. And literally, I mean, we had teletypes. We didn't do punch cards. We were doing a teletype system, and you would have it would then print out essentially a printout of the various signals that you had.
Right.
But it was. I always talk about it as though we were designing chips like with bear claws and
right. Stone hammers. Yeah.
To be honest, we're still doing that. I mean, we don't have to do the simulation like in 24 hours, but like at work, when I'm actually working and we do a synthesis, it takes 24 hours. And then we can do our simulations and all the checks and stuff. And so we've changed the process a little bit. But yeah, I mean, it's not all that different.
Oh, okay. Well, we have to get together and talk about this.
Yeah. Because it's nice going, in quantities of 1 million, what was your answer? Yeah. So, Jeff, give us a shameless plug for your project.
Yes.
I mean, it's really in a lot of ways a love letter to the Commodore 64, but also to the community that surrounds it. So, if you're actively involved in the C64 community, or if you're just someone that grew up with it and remembers it, one of the things I've told people is, like a lot of us, I have a couple of Commodore 64 T-shirts, and I wear them around from time to time. And I'm telling you, I cannot go anywhere before someone stops me and it's like, "Hey, is that the computer from like the 80s? I had one of those, or my buddy had one of those." It's like you can't go anywhere, and somebody, they stop you and they want to tell you the story about what their intersection was.
Right.
Or like I'm a programmer now, or or whatever. But that's where I got my start. And I think when that started happening a lot, that was when I started to realize, man, there's a lot of people out there with a lot of stories. And so the film is really intended to be that. It's not like, hey, let's go back and relive the history of Commodore. It's like it's a celebration of what's going on today. So if you love it or did love it at one time, you're going to really enjoy the film. So we're currently closing in on the last couple of days of our campaign, and probably the easiest way to find it is just to go to iadoremy64film.com right there over my shoulder.
Right.
And that'll take you to our campaign site, which is not Kickstarter. We thought about using Kickstarter, but for a lot of reasons we went with this more independent film focused crowdfunding platform that has sort of a guided process and a lot bigger success rate than Kickstarter. So yeah, would love for the community to come around it and make it happen. So we're excited.
Yeah. Very cool. Yeah, I also have a link in the notes. Hopefully I got all the spelling correctly. Thank you, copy and paste.
What was that technology?
Jeff, I agree with you. I mean, I'm always amazed at how many people cut their teeth, and it sort of created the huge number of software people that learned about, down deep, and you had to do all the pokes and peeks and so forth to get things to work, and they learned about computer architecture from the product. And a whole generation of people learned how to program and really understand what could be done. And it was really satisfying. Certainly, after the fact, it was not what we were. We knew we were doing a neat computer, and that was fun. And all the bells and whistles that it had. Right. What is that?
What's that? Hang on, I'll get you.
This is a cart that my dad helped. Well, my dad designed it. This is a menu loader that he was trying to start a business building these carts. Basically, not a fast loader, but essentially an easy way to use all of the Commodore DOS stuff.
Right. Yeah.
So
and there was so many people doing all kinds of interesting things there. So that was the satisfying after the history of that. And Jeff, what you're doing, I think, is the right thing, is to say, wow, to explore what people did with it and how they learned and how the industry progressed because of the fact that this was an affordable computer that was a real computer at the time.
Yeah, I don't think people understand, or history doesn't really give the Commodore 64 its due in terms of the influence it has. I've had backers and supporters say to me, "Oh yeah, I had a Commodore 64 and it totally influenced my career, and now I work for Meta," and even one of the guys we interviewed, Leif Bloomquist, he's involved with the OSIRIS-REx project. That's delivering materials back to the Earth just a few days ago, and he tells us in his story, the Commodore 64 is where it all started for me, and I don't think I'd be doing what I'm doing today if it weren't for that. So it's had a tremendous influence that I think in some ways has kind of been lost. So it's not the focus of the film, but I think it does help raise awareness on
I like that because of the fact that it's a nice piece of hardware that then unleashed a lot of creativity, and that was sort of, even though, again, as I said, it was about trying to literally, how do you control a TV set as best as could be done to make a really nice game, but it unleashed, it led people to get to control things, to be able to play with, and that was a key piece. And there was a lot of history. Like the PET computer, because it existed, we had an operating system that we could translate that came out of the VIC-20, of course. So it went from the PET to the VIC-20 to the Commodore 64. So a lot of things that intersected and dovetailed to create the product from all the different aspects of Commodore. But yeah, again, that I agree with you that the impact that it had to introduce people to computers at an affordable level was a really significant impact there.
Do you remember that feeling of heaving it over the wall where it's like, okay, now it's up to the user? It's kind of out of our hands, is the way I remember feeling. It's like, okay, we put as much crap in there as we could, go at it type thing.
Yeah, I guess that when the VIC-20 again set the stage because people began to understand it was there, and obviously the Apple I was out at the time.
Right.
And so when we hit when it hit CES in '82, the level of excitement about it, and that what its feature set was, and the 64K and all of those things, people recognized, wow, there's enough memory in here to actually do something meaningful. And so it was that moment that the CES of January '82, and then that preceding the following 4 or 5 months, that's where the momentum was really noticeable, and that my goodness, the push to get it into production was just, oh my God.
Yeah, blood all over the floors. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, Albert, you risked everything. According to Jack, you went and
He was so mad at me. I'll tell you a quick story. Okay,
Yeah.
When the original 65, the original Vic Commodore 64 that we introduced at CES was only capable of about 36 characters on the screen because it had to run it was running at a dot clock of 3.5 megahertz, and it annoyed me because of the fact that it couldn't do 40, and number two was the fact that the dot clock and the color clock back then, when you had this interaction between the
Right.
TV screen. So if you put a 1-0 pattern, it would make a color, and that I did not like that. I really, really did. So after the CES show, I made it change the chip, so it would change. It would separate the dot clock from the color clock, and that was a problem because the chip finally came out and there was this shimmering effect that occurred.
Right.
Okay. And fortunately, one of the guys in the group, Bob Simon was his name. He was an engineer there. He knew about phase lock loops, which I didn't know about. He said, "Oh, we can fix this by adding a phase lock loop." And I went, "Great." So we plugged it in, it worked, and everything was happy. So anyway, the word of what I did filters to Jack Tramiel. He comes in one afternoon. He comes in at one afternoon, and he calls me down to his office, and he rips me up. He goes, "You risked my entire company. What were you thinking? You didn't need to do that. What are you doing that for? What was your backup plan?" I said I didn't have one. I knew it was going to work. But he was so mad at me because you risked this entire company because of the fact that you wanted 40 characters. I said, "Yeah, I did." Yeah. Oh God, that was funny. But hey, it worked, so I was good.
Yeah. Well, and it's kind of proof that the engineers get to do the design a lot of the time. Sometimes marketing gets a hand in there, but a lot of times we're a little quicker than they are.
Yeah, the disk drive was the biggest thing. Had it had the higher speed disk drive, I think it would have even allowed more power to it, because you could have really downloaded programs and had some virtual aspects to it.
Yes, someone was asking about why was it never patched later on? Was it just because of the
compatibility?
Yeah.
So I know there was a whole industry of fast loader cartridges, and Jiffy DOS, and
that mostly worked.
And
probably.
Software that sped it up.
It's interesting. People talk about that, but like from my personal experience growing up with it, I didn't think about that. I didn't think, man, this disk drive is slow. I started out with a cassette drive. I'm like, that's slow. And then the disk drive, I thought I died and went to heaven when I got that. And I didn't have really anything to compare it to.
That's true.
I wasn't like, oh, this computer over here is loading faster. It's just like, I just accepted it as a reality, and I thought it was fine. So. Yeah. Aside from the disk loading, is there anything else that you would have liked to have seen get into the 64 that didn't make it in?
No, really not. No, I mean, it really did have. Okay, I wish that I would have abandoned the block structure for the video and made it a bitmap rather than just block structure.
Okay.
That would have been
APA?
nice. But I didn't have the time. I mean, the VIC-20 was set up that way, and I copied that architecture over, and then we added the sprites, and we increased it to 40 characters. So, but you couldn't. It was really. It would have been not. I mean, a bitmap is a nicer feature to design with rather than the block structure that we had.
Right.
It worked, but again, it was a detail. Okay, but ultimately, no. I mean, it really did have all the features that we had hoped to accomplish there. It really was a complete product. It was what we had envisioned. Literally, it was where I started on this whole video project back in 77, 78.
Right.
the 64 was the VIC-2 was the culmination of that.
Right, and if you've seen the demos that run on the VIC-20, we don't even know all the modes that you build into it.
It's amazing. I'm always amazed at how much. I mean, I knew that about the interrupt structure and be able to reuse the sprites and reuse the block structure, and I intended that to be there. I knew that it was there when I did it, but I didn't know if people would be able to take advantage of it. And when they actually did, I was like, wow, it worked.
Right, right. And they're doing it with peeks and pokes before we came out with the sprite editor.
And to Jeff's point, it really, people dove into the depths and learned about how a computer works. And in order to get to that level, you had to really understand what was going on at the depth level. And people were willing to spend the time and energy to learn that. So that was really, that was what was cool, is that people really recognized all those sort of little hooks that I built into the chipset and they were able to dive in and find them and utilize them as I had hoped they would.
Right. Now, didn't the SID chip originally have 4 voices?
Yes, it had 4 voices, but it was too big a chip. We had a limitation of the chip had to be about 200 mils on the side. Anything bigger than that, the yield was lousy. And so, yeah, I mean, you know, it's funny today you talk about 90% yields and 95%.
Right, right.
Back then, 35 to 40 was good.
Wow.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah.
That puts a totally different spin on it.
Oh yeah. So all of a sudden the chip size was really significant because that and, you know, you get a few more die per wafer, and yeah, so we basically had a limitation. It couldn't be more than about 200, 210 on the side. So we had 4 voices on the chip. Mils, not much. This is a mils. That's what we worked back then, rather than millimeters. But yeah, so we had 4 voices, but it was too big, so we had to strip one out.
So is that because of the reticle or the process?
It was the process. It was purely the reticles could be that big. It wasn't a reticle issue. It was purely the fact that the number of chip on the wafer, number of chips on the wafer, you just didn't have you wouldn't have the economics wouldn't work for the yield we had of the bigger chip.
So here's a wafer I got out of the basement of MOS, and you said about the dots for the bad bad dot. You can see them. I counted. It's about 30% yield on this 8563. All those little black dots are bad die.
Right. Yeah.
Good grief.
Yeah. It was, I mean, the clean room and the process and the photolithography back then were just not. It's night and day between what we have today and so 30-40% yield was considered good.
Right.
Yeah.
Wasn't there a full room to do the photo reduction or something? Somebody just told me that.
Yes, you are correct. We had back then you when you did a chip, you would do it by hand, and it was drawn by hand, and we did then you literally digitize the hand drawing.
Right.
And then you could do step and repeats, and that was the computerization. You basically put it together with that. But then, in order to create the reticle, we had this pool table size cutting plotter essentially, which had an X-Acto knife on it.
Right.
So you lay down this ruby lith, and then the XY coordinates would be poured into this machine that would then cut out the XY pattern for the particular reticle you were doing. And then what we would have what was called a peeling party.
Right.
And you'd have literally by the manual, you would have tweezers that you would peel off the layers so that you would expose what you wanted to have.
Wow.
That's incredible.
And then it was literally like 4 by 5 feet long, 4 by 5 feet, that they would hang in front of this camera that was the size of a room with these bellows. It was a room-sized camera that would then shoot it down by a factor of like 100 to 1, and then they would shoot it down another factor in order to get to the size of the chip itself, and then step that onto the pattern.
Wow.
So that's how it was done back then. But literally, that was the time it was done. Now, I think when the Commodore 64 was done, right around there, we eliminated. They didn't have to do we'd have to do the peeling by hand. But
right.
The
I was there.
The 6502 we did, but the VIC we did not have to. By the time we got to the VIC, that was automated, so we didn't have to actually do that anymore.
Right.
So are either?
Go ahead,
Bill.
Go ahead.
Are either of you familiar with Matt Venn's Zero to ASIC course?
Yeah. Yes.
What's your thoughts on that?
I thought it was wonderful. I thought that's really where I thought it was a great thing. I was really amazed that even back when I was taking that. Right after Commodore, I think that a lot of the ASIC stuff and all that came out as well. There was a lot of college course structures that were coming out, which not automated, but really taught that whole process. I thought it was wonderful. I really did. Yeah.
Have you ever thought of using Zero to ASIC or what is the other one? Google's open source shuttle to make some more SID chips or VIC chips?
Well, I've used a lot of shuttle processes from various designs I've done over last 30 years, and
sure.
Now it's so simple. You do a design and you can use one of the FPGAs. Buy a giant size FPGA, put it all in there. And and then you take that and then you move that into an actual hard design. It's a whole different environment. It's so much. You can do so much more and get it right the first time. It's just a different world from that perspective.
How much of the SID chip is analog to where it's not treating it as digital ones and zeros, where it goes linear?
A significant amount. The whole
right. So you can't do that on an FPGA.
You get with all SPICE simulations.
Right. Sizes of transistors.
Yeah. Even like all the whole video structure and the whole
color matrix
structure we did on that was all done in simulation with hardware. With the analog, there was no digital there at all.
I'm glad to hear that. I called the SID an analog chip in a digital world, and I got called on that in my comments quite a bit.
Oh, really? It really was.
But I figured it was analog because it takes what was it? It takes in the 9-volt AC.
Yeah, 9 to 12. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's what because you needed that to run get reasonable noise control out of the thing.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, the engineer that did the HMOS version of the SID chip changed voltage, did some other things. I never saw him listen to it. Whereas I can picture Bob Yanis listening to the SID chip. I can't picture this guy from Intel listening to the SID chip. That's not what he did.
Well, Bob was an audiophile. He loved audio.
Right.
That was his thing, yeah.
So, Jeff Brace, what would you ask Albert while we got him? Oh, ask him to come to VCF.
Well, yeah, I saw you there. I saw your, was that the one we were at in Jersey? Is it?
Yeah.
Okay.
That was the big, not this year 2023. It was 2022. It was the 13 Commodore engineers all on one stage. I was sitting right next to you, and Bill was on the other side. He almost fell off the stage.
So here's what happens, and Jeff will corroborate this with me. You ask a group of people, your first group, your friends, right? Come on, bros, I need you on stage. I don't know. It's so far away. Well, I'm asking you so you have time. Okay, second group of people, can you make it? Oh, maybe. All right, third group of people, I'm panicking, right? And then all of them show up. That's what happened.
So, Jeff, what are you planning to have there next spring?
So I can tell you the theme of the show is the rise of the GUI. because it's the anniversary of the original Macintosh. But did that on purpose. But and I'm also thinking about a T-shirt which gives homage to the mother of all demos, the Xerox PARC, and then the original Macintosh, because that brought it to mainstream consciousness, and then the Amiga, and then Windows, because they were all very significant.
Yeah.
The second theme is computer art. I've always wanted to have something with graphics, but computer art is generalized among all computers. You can have ASCII art, and all the way up to PaintShop Pro or Deluxe Paint. So we're going to continue what we sort of started it in last year was with the Commodore Roundtable, but we want to continue. And this year we did 2 roundtables with YouTube stars, but we want to continue the roundtable idea, and it's it doesn't necessarily have to be YouTube people. It could be anybody, but people that are interesting, people that work together. Bill and I have been, every once in a while he's like, "What do you think about this? What do you think about?" So we're sort of tweaking the idea right now, and maybe we might have, instead of Bill, we might have a different person moderate it, because
we've seen me.
Yeah, you get a variety. Plus, and we're also, so those are the 2 things, and so I'll be starting to build up other speakers, because we were actually quite full last year. I had to create another hour on both ends of the show, but I have to be respectful of the AV guys, because they're not getting a break, so I have to hardwire lunchtime. So a lot of stuff that's in terms of speakers, and I'm trying to figure out a solution to consignment, because it was squeezed into this cafeteria. So I have an idea of where we're going to put it. It's just a different building, and to expand it to the outside area. So I'm trying to come up with ideas and solutions to use what space we have available at InfoAge, because relatively it's pretty inexpensive compared to going to a hotel space, because they're $30,000. I'm like, well, I'd have to charge $100 per person to make that money, and I'm trying to keep it affordable. So a lot of different, tweaks here and there. I'm not going to do any live streaming this year. It was just, we don't have the bandwidth to do that. I'm considering doing something where if you're on site, then you can maybe see it on some strategically placed screens, but we'll have to see if I can get that done. So a lot of different things going on. We may have, we had when you were there, I think it was Commodore, it was Apple II classroom. Last year was a Commodore classroom where we had instructor teaching on real machines, and here's how to do basic, here's how to do assembly. I think this year we're going to do Atari computers, just because they're more easily available. But a lot of different things. I try to make a lot of variety, and you can see that in all the videos, that all these little tiny YouTube channels. I'm like, I didn't know about this guy and this guy and this guy and this guy, and well, that guy's very interesting. I'm going to invite him to the roundtable next year. So, but they were saying how, they wouldn't come down, drive 5 hours from Boston just for a swap meet, but they would come for all of these different things, because it's worth their time, money, and effort to take time off from work and vacation time.
Right. So I figure if we get Albert for 2 days, Friday and Saturday, I don't mean to push the boundaries there, Albert. But,
I can tell you, in 2 years, Bill and I have been planning this for already so far a year. The anniversary of the 128, we're going to invite a lot of Commodore people, 128, Amiga people.
Yeah,
RJ, because the T-Pug had connected me with RJ McCall. He's in California. We may not get all the California people, but maybe you could push that to the West. So, but anyway, that'll be the big Commodore year, 2025. So you're invited definitely to that one. We come every year.
Be there, be square.
It's interesting.
Right. Hey, Albert, before we go, did you hook up with T-Pug? I sent an intro email between you and Nico.
We never connected after the intro. I don't.
All right, I'll bang again. They're very interested in having you. So, and Jeff, one more time, I want to spend some money on a Commodore 64 video. Where do I go?
Right.
iadoremy64film.com is the easiest way to find it. Yeah.
Cool.
Very cool. Go there, spend your money. It's not too late.
Yes.
Yep.
I did $100. I want the Blu-ray version.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
$50 gets the Blu-ray version. Yeah.
Albert, somebody gave me crap the other day about my computer didn't have really an HDMI output, and I had to remind people we didn't have blue back then. There was just RNG, no blue. All right, everybody, thank you for joining us tonight, and everybody have a happy and a safe weekend. Thank you.
You too.
That's left.
See you, folks.